SRM. Okay, tinggi ya. So awak fokus lah untuk kelas akademik. Tak sangka jugalah sebab tengok kuis tu ramai yang orang kata rendah. Tapi test tinggi pula. Okay, baguslah. Satu perkembangan yang orang kata drastik lah. Okay. Saya harap kekalkan momentum ni lah sebab 16 orang juga yang dapat 8 ke 8.5 markah. Antara teramai lah yang skor. Okay. Dan juga ada juga yang dapat 18 pelajar juga yang dapat skor 7 markah dan ke atas. Highest juga lah. Okay. And then ada juga di antara kalian semua seorang pelajar yang tak perlu saya baca nama yang dapat paling rendah 2.5 per 10. Seorang pelajar yang tak dapat, mungkin ada masalah dari segi connection ke, dari segi yalah pembelajaran ke. Okay. Sepatutnya midterm, okay, tempat untuk you punya kumpul markah dengan banyak. Sebab dia tak banyak calculation. Dia lebih kepada konsep, dia lebih kepada teori, lebih kepada understanding. Okay. Yang ada pun sikit sangat lah calculation. 30% yang last chapter, financial forecasting, itu je. The rest lebih kepada intro to finance and financial environments. Okay, benda yang orang kata boleh baca dan jawab lah. Tapi tak apa. Kita masih ada lagi 80 markah untuk skor dia punya overall mark lah untuk introduction to finance ni. So maybe you boleh fokus kepada area yang belum lagi dinilai, terutamanya group project. Okay, group project ni banyak markah sebab group project ni 30 markah. So you boleh berhempas pulas kat situ lah untuk tingkatkan lagi. Dan mungkin saya akan buat quiz lagi. Dan next quiz ni janganlah ambil ringan. Siapa yang nak orang kata nak bagi tinggi markah dia. Okay, so quiz nanti kena study lebih. Okay. Okay. Apa yang awak nampak sekarang ni? Nampak slide ke nampak klik? Sebab saya tengah buka klik ni.
Slide.
Nampak slide?
Nampak slide.
Okay. Slide. Okay, bagus. Okay, kalau nampak slide kita terus kepada kelas lah. Alright. Now we discuss on the next topic. Okay. Saya nak kunci ni. Under this topic, okay, we will discuss on two, orang kata apa discussion lah, dua discussion. Kalau tengok daripada DCI, kita ada topik 5, okay, which is Introduction to Working Capital Management. So under this topic, we discuss on managing current assets, appropriate level of working capital. Okay, done. After that, topic 6, okay, in the DCI, which is current assets management. So under this part, we cover on cash management, marketable securities management, account receivable management, and inventory management. So basically, for this PowerPoint, chapter 15, working capital and current asset management, cover both topic 5 and 6. And we will use the same PowerPoint, okay, for this week and next week. Sebab tu kalau awak tengok kat sini, banyak dia punya slide, 109 slide. Tu pun saya dah buang dah beberapa detail yang tak perlu. Tapi ada lagi yang kita akan tengok dan kita akan skip lah. Yang masa macam tak perlu, saya akan skip. Okay. Saya tak record Selalu pelajar minta dengan saya link recording. Tapi saya tengok dalam cloud tak ada pula. Pun saya tak ada record kat sini. Tak ada orang remind saya untuk record. Jadi tak adalah recording. Ini saya cuba record lah. Okay. Okay, bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So, today we will discuss on the first part of working capital and current asset management. So we look at until cash conversion cycle. For inventory management, we discuss on next week. So what is net working capital management? So working capital management, or we call it as a short-term financing, okay, is a management of current asset and current liabilities. Okay, so the goal is to manage the current asset and current liabilities to achieve a balance between profitability and risk that contribute positively to the firm's value. So here, when we call it as a working capital, okay, it's referred to the current asset and current liabilities. How do the firm perform their business operation? Let's say next week, okay, the company to start to decide their business, okay, and so the company needs the raw materials. So the company need the raw material in order to develop the inventories in order to sell their product. So the inventory, the raw materials, okay, the finished good is under current asset. Okay, how to finance the current asset? Maybe the company will make a short-term borrowing, notes payable. So notes payable is considered as current liabilities. In order to purchase the raw materials, the company made short-term borrowing. So here, the management of purchase of raw materials to produce inventories to finance the current asset with current liability by short-term borrowing, we call it as a working capital management. Okay. If the company have optimum, okay, between current liability to cover the current asset, the company perform well lah. Okay. So the goal is to manage the current asset and current liability to achieve a balance between profitability and risk. Okay. What is risk in working capital? So the risk here, whenever the company cannot catch up, okay, cannot finance their current asset. Let's say the company needs to have 50,000 in order to operate their business, but the company only have 40,000 funds. And then here, this is the risk of insolvent. The company will going to bankrupt if the company cannot pay the rest, okay, of their financing amount. So the company need to pay 50,000, but the company do have only 40,000 along their business operation. Only the company only can generate around 40,000 revenue, net profit, but the cost is for 50,000. The company short around 10,000. So the company cannot pay the 10,000. So it's the chances, the risk for the company going to bankrupt. Okay, or we call it as an insolvent. So this is the risk here. Okay, not the risk like currency risk, not the risk like Syariah risk, okay, liquidity risk, and so on. It's more about insolvent risk. So what do we means here by profitability? So profitability is whenever the company focus more towards operation to pay their financing, short-term borrowing, okay, So the company will have less focus on investment. Investment in term of what? In term of long-term asset. As for example, machine. As for example, fixed assets. As for example, factories. Okay. So the company cannot uh, add on more machine in order to produce more production inventories. Okay. From here, the company will produce less inventories and make a less revenue sales. So the profit gain by the business operation will be less. Okay, if the company focus more on towards working current assets. So if the company focus more towards investment, okay, purchase more machinery in order to produce more production, inventories and so on. So the company will have less capable to pay their short-term borrowing and then expose the company towards risk of insolvency. Okay, so ada dua aspek kat sini lah. Profit and risk. So, goal kat sini matlamat dia untuk balance between profit and risk. Kalau company tu tak balance, maknanya dia akan fokus salah satu lah. So, company tu tak nak bankrupt. So, dia akan sediakan banyak cash untuk bayar dia punya working capital. Tetapi dia tak boleh generate more profit from their business operation. Bila company tu orang kata eager to gain more profit, dia beli mesin, tambah mesin, beli kilang baru apa semua, tapi dia tak ada cash, available cash untuk bayar working capital, ada risiko kepada company tu going bankrupt. Jadi kena balance between profit and risk. Okay, boleh faham konsep dia? So working capital management tu how the firm manage between their current asset and current liabilities. That's all. Itu je. Okay, yang ni boleh baca So, net working capital. Bila kita kata net kat sini, dia adalah bersih lah. Dia tolak antara current asset and current liabilities. Contoh net profit. Revenue tolak segala cost dan juga expenses. Pendapatan bersih. Okay. So, working capital. The portion of the firm's asset used in day-to-day transaction. The primary elements of working capital is circulate from one form to another in ordinary course of business. So net working capital is different between the firm's current asset and its current liabilities. If the current asset more than current liabilities, so it is positive outcome. If current liabilities more than current asset, it will be negative outcome. Okay, lebih banyak lah dia punya tanggungan liability dia. Negatif lah kat sini. Okay. So the conversion, okay, of current asset from inventory to accounts receivable to cash provide an important source of funds that firm use to pay current liabilities. So this is the component, okay, the inventory, the account receivable. So at last will be converted into cash. So the cash here will be used to pay the short-term borrowing. Okay. As for example, note payable and so on. Sebab note payable, short-term borrowing ada tempoh dia yang perlu dilangsaikan lah. Sebagai contoh, dia ambil hutang sebulan. So, bulan depan, next month, dia kena bayar dah. Bila mana dia dah dapat dah keuntungan daripada bisnes dia, operasi dia tu, dia kena terus bayar untuk mengelakkan charge tambahan dan juga reputasi company tu. Nak jaga reputasi company tu on time bayar hutang. So in general, the greater the margin by which the firm current asset cover its current liability, the greater the firm's ability to pay its bills as they come due. Maknanya lagi besar dia punya asset tu, lagi bagus lah. Sebab menunjukkan bahawa company tu stable. Okay, kukuh dari segi financial position. So, trade-off between profitability and risk. Sebagaimana yang saya maklum sebelum tadi dah. So, a trade-off exists between the firm's profitability and its risk. So, risk in this context of working capital management is the probability that firm will be unable to pay its bills as they come due, which is insolvent lah. Okay, company tu tak dapat bayar hutang dia. Dia berhutang banyak, at the end business dia tak menjadi. Sepatutnya dia hutang RM50,000, dia kena bayar RM60,000, tapi hanya RM40,000 saja yang dapat hasil daripada bisnes dia. So dia tak bayar hutang. Itu risiko dia lah. Risk dan konteks ni. Risk ni luas, banyak operational risk and so on. Tapi kat sini itu dimaksudkan risk. Other things being equal, a greater a firm's net working capital, the lower its risk of insolvency. Maknanya, apabila net working capital tu besar, means that positif lah. Okay. Apakah yang maksud net working capital positif? Net working capital adalah current asset melebihi current liability. Kemampuan untuk bayar lagi besar daripada tanggungan hutang yang dimiliki company tu. In other words, the more net working capital, the more liquid the firm, and therefore the lower its risk of becoming insolvent. Tetapi, having too much liquidity may reduce profitability. Dengan banyaknya allocation cash kat situ, akan menyebabkan company tu tak, orang kata, invest untuk long term production. Jadi, production masih lagi dalam takut yang lama lah. Mungkin revenue, okay, from the output of the production 50,000. So 50,000 lah yang akan hasilkan sepanjang masa. Tak ada pergandaan 100,000, 150,000. So company tu tak berkembang. Okay. Alhamdulillah. Alright. Boleh follow lagi ke? Boleh Ni konsep baru. Okay, konsep baru. Lepas ni kita akan masuk cash conversion cycle. Yang tu kena perhatian lebih lah. Alright. So, changes in current asset. So, to understand how changing the level of the firm's current asset affect its profitability, okay, risk trade-off, consider the ratio of current asset to total asset. Why total asset? Because total asset, we do have current and fixed asset, atau kita katakan current asset and non-current asset. This ratio indicate the percentage of total asset that is current. When the ratio increase, that mean dia punya profitability decrease. Why? Because the current asset increase. Okay, boleh Tak apa, nanti kita tengok formula lagi senang sikit. Nak faham. So, fixed asset add more value to a firm product than do current asset. So, dalam konteks ni, ada dua point yang perlu awak faham. First thing, current asset. Current asset ni lebih kepada liquidity. Okay. Manakala non-current asset ataupun fixed asset adalah lebih kepada profitability. Kenapa? Because the fixed asset add more value to a firm product than do current asset. Fixed asset, as for example, machinery, factories, okay, buildings, lands, and so on lah. So benda-benda macam tu akan meningkatkan lagi produksi, okay, penghasilan inventory yang akan meningkatkan lagi sales jualan company. Itu dalam konteks kita panggil sebagai invest. Company itu invest dalam bentuk ni lah. Okay, bukan dalam securities. Invest dalam business operation dia. So kalau company tu allocate certain portion capital in fixed asset, so dia akan generate more revenue. So more profit the company will gain from their business operation as compared to the current asset. Current asset, dia hanya lebih kepada kecairan, liquidity. As for example, inventory can converted into cash within short time period. Account receivable can do more easily converted into cash. Cash, dah nama cash lah kan. Memang itulah. So lagi banyak current asset, okay, lagi senang company tu liquidate dia punya asset into cash in order to pay for their liabilities. Untuk mengelakkan daripada risk of insolvent. Alright. Dalam formula ni, okay, ni adalah formula current asset. Current asset divide by total asset. Again, total asset comprised of current and non-current asset. Makin tinggi current asset, makin besarlah dia punya ratio ni. So, apabila makin besar ratio dia, bermaksud makin kurang profit company tu akan generate. And then makin kurang juga risiko yang diterima oleh company tu untuk bankrupt. Ni yang bagusnya lah. Makin kurang risiko. Tapi yang tak bagusnya makin kurang profit, gain. Apabila, okay, dalam konteks lain pula, current liability to total asset. Bila mana ratio ni tinggi, okay, so dia akan increase in profit and then increase in risk. That's why dalam finance kita katakan high risk, high return. Okay. Senang sikit tengok formula kan. Alright. Ni tak apa. Apa explain ya. Okay. Other things being equal, if firms cut back on current assets, so they tend to increase risk. Maknanya contoh current asset dia banyak, tiba dia nak kurangkan current asset sebab dia kata, oh, it's time to us to, orang kata, increase our profit. So dia fokus allocate towards fixed asset and so on lah. Jadi dia akan meningkatkan risiko kat sini untuk bankrupt. So why firms are increasing their risk by cutting back on their holding of current asset? They are increasing their holdings of the least risky current asset, which is cash. Okay. Changes in a firm's current liabilities affect its profitability risk trade-off juga kat sini. So this can be measured using the ratio of current liabilities to total asset as formula yang sebelum ni lah. Okay, formula ni, current liability and total asset. Ia berlawanan dengan current asset to total asset. Okay, dia punya efek tu berlawanan. Okay. When the ratio increases, makin besar outcome dia tu, current liabilities divide by total asset, profitability increase because current liabilities are less expensive source of financing than long-term debt or equity. Okay, so the current liability are less expensive because they are less risky and bear no risk. Bear no interest. Okay, makin singkat masa, makin kecil lah interest yang dibayar. Okay, makin panjang tempoh masa, makin tinggi kadar interest yang dikenakan. Okay. Makin kurang kadar interest, kuranglah pembayaran dan tinggilah keuntungan. Okay, itulah dia punya ni lah. Nature dia. So, however, when the ratio of current liabilities to total asset increases, the risk of insolvency also rises because the increase in current liability decrease net working capital. Dia berbalik kepada teori asal, konsep asal. Okay, yang mana kalau current liability lagi besar daripada current asset, so dia akan membawa kepada risiko yang tinggi untuk insolvent. So the opposite effect on profit and risk result from a reduction in ratio of current liability to total asset as compared to current asset to total asset. Itu je. Okay, boleh faham So dah habis dah yang ni untuk current asset and current liability. Now we look at cash conversion cycle. Apa itu cash conversion cycle? The cash conversion cycle is the length of time between when a firm pays cash for raw material and when it receive cash from collecting receivable. Dengan arti kata lain, okay, dalam bahasa Melayunya lah. Okay. Bila mana company tu dapat generate cash daripada business operation dia. Daripada mula-mula dia beli raw material, okay, dia produce inventories and then becoming a finished good. Dia jual inventories dia. Lepas tu, mungkin dia jual dalam bentuk hutang kan, receivables. And then dia collect balik receivable dia tu untuk dapatkan cash. Sebab cash yang dia dapat daripada bisnes tu, dia akan bayar hutang dia dengan supplier sebagai contoh. Whenever dia purchase raw material, dia purchase secara hutang, account payable. Jadi dia perlukan duit. Account payable ni short time lah. Masa yang tempoh masa yang pendek. Jadi dia perlukan cash untuk bayar segera. Bila dia dapat bayar segera, and next time dia boleh beli secara hutang lagi dengan supplier tu. Ataupun kalau dia lambat bayar kepada supplier, dia akan dikenakan charge ataupun penalty. Harga makin mahal lah. Kos makin tinggi. Untuk mengelakkan harga barang mahal dikenakan oleh supplier, dia kena bayar on time. So nak bayar on time tu dia perlukan cash. So cash tu dia perlu collect secepat mungkin lah. So tempoh CCC ni lah yang menentukan bila company dapat generate cash daripada business operation dia. So cara kira dia ada beberapa cara. Bukan beberapa cara. Dia ada beberapa step untuk mengira CCC. Pertama, kita kena compute operating cycle. So dalam operating cycle ni ada average age of inventory, AAI, dan juga average collection period, ACP. Okay. So operating cycle ni apa? Operating cycle ni ada time from the beginning of the production process to collection of cash from sale to the finished good. From the sale of the finished good. Okay. Terusnya, when we have operating cycle, and then we can calculate for cash conversion cycle by subtracting the average payment period. Maknanya operating cycle tolak dengan average payment period, kita akan dapatlah cash conversion cycle yang kita nak tu. Average payment period ni apa? Iaitu the time it takes to pay the account payable measured in days. So keseluruhannya kita boleh buat macam ni lah formula dia. Cash conversion cycle, okay, samalah dengan average age of inventory plus average collection period minus average payment period. Kita dapatlah cash conversion cycle. So each day of the cycle represent a day for which the firm needs financing to sustain its operation. The longer the cash conversion cycle, the greater a firm's financing needed. Makin besar, makin tinggi cash conversion cycle tu, makin banyak amount yang diperlukan oleh company tu untuk bayar dia punya ataupun untuk maintain dia punya operation, business operation. If a firm changes any of the component of the cash conversion cycle, like inventories, like account receivable, ada perubahan masa, it changes the financial resources tied up in day-to-day operation. Akan berubah lah. Contoh biasanya dia perlukan modal RM50,000. Apabila berubah dari segi inventory, lambat produce ke, lambat terjual ke, dia akan meningkatkan kos kat situ. Mungkin RM70,000 pada waktu tersebut. Dia akan merubahkan dia punya cost dari segi day-to-day operation tu. So, cash conversion cycle ni penting lah. A firm can lower its working capital. So, working capital in what? Current asset and current liability. Okay. Kalau kat konteks ni lebih merujuk kepada inilah net working capital lah. Okay. A firm can lower its working capital if it can speed up its operating cycle. For example, if a firm accept bank credit, bank credit, like a Visa card, it will receive cash sooner after the sale is transacted. And if it has to wait until the customer pays its account receivable. Maknanya, kalau dia boleh speed up dia punya working capital ni lagi bagus lah. Seperti contoh, kredit dia ada Visa card ni, dia akan dapat cash lagi cepat berbanding nak tunggu orang pulang balik. Apa panggil apa dia jual secara hutang, dia nak collect by individual customer hutang tersebut. So, risikonya customer tu tak bayar, risikonya customer tu bayar lambat. Lambat dia dapat cash. Kalau dia jual dalam bentuk credit card, so automatic customer tu akan bayar kepada credit card. Lambat bayar, urusan dia dengan bank credit card tu. Kita dah dapat duit dah. Sebab itulah antara orang kata facilities yang membantu company ni, antaranya credit card lah yang dapat mempercepatkan company tu dapat on time dia punya cash ataupun credit sales tersebut. So yang ni ada charge dia lah. Okay, as for example, in its 2020 10K filing with the SEC, Best Buy reported that it had revenue of $43.64 billion. Okay, revenue dia. Cost of goods sold of $33.559 billion. Okay, account receivable of $1.15 billion, inventory of $5.17 billion, and account payables of $5.29 billion. Okay, bila mana kita dah ada item-item ni, kita boleh calculate lah dia punya cash conversion cycle. So from this information, assuming for simplicity that cost of goods sold equal purchases, we can determine that the company's average age of inventory was 56 days. Okay. And its average collection period was 10 days. And its average payment period was 57 days. Thus, the cash conversion cycle for Best Buy company was just 9 days. Okay. So 9 days lah company tu perlukan financing needs. Okay, to support their business operation. Figure 15.2 present Best Buy cash conversion cycle as a timeline. Okay, kita tengok timeline dia. Pada information yang kita dapat tu, inilah timeline dia. So kat sini, average age of inventory 59 days. Daripada purchase of raw material until finished good. Okay, mengambil tempoh 56 hari untuk dihasilkan barang dia, untuk dia beli barang raw material, untuk dia produce, masuk kilang dan sebagainya. Dapat hasilkan barang yang siap mengambil masa almost 2 months lah. So dah tempoh ni juga dia perlukan masa untuk daripada sini, 56 hari lepas 65 hari dah siap production tu, dia perlu jual barang dia. So barang tu terjual dalam tempoh 10 hari. 10 hari ni termasuk dia punya collection lah. Cash collection tu. So mungkin pembeli beli secara hutang, kredit, and then dia mengambil masa 10 hari untuk dia dapatkan balik cash daripada customer tu. So on average, on average keseluruhan lah, on overall, dia mengambil masa daripada tempoh kosong, sehingga dapat pungut balik cash daripada hasil jualan tu adalah selama 66 hari. 2 bulan lebih lah. Bagaimana pula dengan dia punya perkadaran untuk bayar kepada supplier? So average payment period dia adalah 57 hari. So kat sini dia short sebanyak 9 hari. So cash conversion cycle dia adalah 9 hari. Daripada tempoh dia collect cash dengan tempoh cash yang perlu dia lansaikan kepada supplier. Okay, if we add Best Buy inventory and receivable balances and subtract account payable, we find that the company has $1.03 billion invested in the working capital components of this cash conversion cycle. That gives the company plenty of motivation to make improvements. Changes in any of the components cycle will change the resources tied up in Best Buy operation. For example, if Best Buy could reduce its inventory from 56 days to 50 days, holding as equal, its working capital requirement would fall by almost $570 million only. Maknanya banyak lah. 6 hari je beza. So dia dah banyak jimat dah kat situ. And then daripada duit lebihan tu dia boleh salurkan kepada investment to improve dia punya production. So ini menggambarkan bahawa why company pay close attention to working capital management. Kita nampak senang je. Okay, ada duit buat bisnes dapat untung, rolling balik. Tapi kenapakah fokus tu, okay, tumpuan kepada working capital ni amat tinggi. Sebabkan ni lah, walaupun sehari je beza, 6 hari je beza, so cost of dia punya ni, production ni banyak untuk ni lah, penjimatan tu. Okay, kita tengok perbandingan beberapa company lah. Okay, so Walmart ni antara company yang orang kata tersohor juga, mengemasa negatif 13 days. Maknanya dia available to pay dia punya ni, available to collect dia punya cash tu before dia punya payment period. Lagi bagus lah. So Brown Forman paling ni lah, dahsyat lah, 492 hari lebih pada setahun. So dia perlukan banyak financing untuk support, untuk sustain dia punya business cycle ni. Okay. So funding requirement of cash conversion cycle. A positive cash conversion cycle create a need for funding. Okay, maknanya positif ni dia perlukan duit lah untuk support. That need can be permanent or seasonal. Mungkin bilangan cash conversion cycle ni berubah-ubah lah. Ada tempoh yang cepat, ada tempoh yang lambat. Mengikut musim lah, musim jualan. It can be funded with strategies ranging from aggressive to conservative. Maknanya ada strategi jugalah untuk fund. Okay, tak kena cara, tinggilah charge interest dikenakan. Makin cost kepada company tu. Permanent versus seasonal funding needs. Okay. An investment in operating asset that grows as a firm does but does not vary seasonally. Okay, beza permanent seasonal bermusim, berubah-ubah lah. Okay. So seasonal and investment in operating asset that varies over time as a result of seasonal sales. Jualan musim cuti, jualan musim raya, jualan musim persekolahan. Itu seasonal lah. Okay. If the firm sales show no seasonal pattern, maknanya sama sepanjang tahun, and sales may be growing over time, but the cash conversion cycle is relatively steady, this create a permanent funding requirement. Sebab walaupun dia punya jualan tu makin bertambah, tetapi cash conversion cycle dia sama je. Contoh 9 hari je. Jadi kat sini dia perlukan permanent funding requirement. Sebab dia permanent lah. Sama 9 stable, 9, 10, 10, 8. Macam tu je Jadi dia hanya perlukan permanent funding requirement. There is a need to cover the gap between cash payment and collection that grows the firm does not. Okay, very seasonally. Maknanya dia dah tahu dah. Setiap kali business operation, dia akan ambil masa lebih kurang 9 ke 10 hari. Untuk ni lah. Bayar dia punya. Dapatkan cash untuk bayar hutang tu. So if the firm sales are seasonal, its investment in operating asset will vary over the year. Ini susah sikit nak baca lah. Sebab ia berubah-ubah. And the firm will have a seasonal funding requirement on top of the permanent funding required to cover operating asset at time when the cycle is relatively short. Okay. Bagi contoh yang ni lah. Okay. Operating cycle dia berubah-ubah. 150 ke 100 hari. Okay. Fluctuate macam ni. Tahun 2010, 2011 sama je. Pattern dia macam ni. Okay. Ada setengah tahun, ada satu tahun tu 2017 tu meningkat tinggi 250. 50 hari naik berbeza. So ni pattern dia lah, seasonal. Okay. Ni apa ni? Example, Nicholson Company holds on average 50,000 in cash and marketable security, $1.25 million in inventory and $750,000 in account receivable. So Nicholson business is very stable over time. So its operating asset can be viewed as permanent. In addition, Nicholson account payable of $425,000 are stable over time. Thus, Nicholson has a permanent investment in operating asset of $1.625 million. Okay, operating asset dia. Macam mana nak kira? Kita ambil dia punya cash. Kita ambil dia punya inventory. Kita ambil dia punya account receivable, which is current asset semua ni. And then kita tolak dengan current liability, iaitu account payable dia. Kita dapatlah sebanyak $1.625 million. That amount would also equal its permanent funding requirement. Yang ni dikatakan sebagai positif lah net working capital. Memandangkan dia dah stable. So inilah amount yang diperlukan lah setiap kali dia buat bisnes. So in contrast, company lain pula ni, Sample Pump Company which produce bicycle pumps has seasonal funding needed. Sample has seasonal sales. Okay. Its peak sales are driven by the summertime purchases of bicycle pump. Sample hold at minimum $25,000 in cash and marketable security, around $100,000 in inventory, and $60,000 in account receivable. So at peak time, sample inventory increase. Banyaknya. 750,000 berbanding 25,000. So seasonal lah Perubahan yang drastik. And its account receivable increase to $400,000. To capture production efficiencies, sample produce pump at a constant rate throughout the year. Its account payable remains at 50,000 throughout the year. Ada perubahan seasonal dari segi jualan. Musim panas, musim biasa lah. So here, disebabkan seasonal tu, sample has a permanent funding requirement for its minimum level. So minimum level tu dijadikan sebagai dia punya permanent funding. Okay, dalam konteks ni, permanent funding dia adalah $135,000. Macam mana nak kira? 25,000, okay, daripada minimum cash, and 100,000 minimum dia punya inventory, and 60,000 minimum dia punya account receivable, tolak dengan 50,000 account payable dia. Dapatlah 135,000. And peak seasonal funding requirements. Kita ambil waktu peak dia, iaitu around 990,000, almost $1 million. Okay. Pengiraan pun sama juga. Okay. So samples total funding requirement for operating asset vary from minimum $135,000 to $1.125 million in seasonal peak lah. So dalam konteks ni kita boleh tengok dia punya graph dia macam ni. Okay. Seasonal peak dia $1.125 million kat atas ni. Maka minimum, okay, ataupun minimum dia punya ni lah, permanent funding dia lah, sebanyak $135,000. Okay. Setakat ni boleh follow ke? Boleh dengar ke? Sebab senyap je ni. Ada
Boleh.
ke? Okay, ada lagi. Baik. Takut lost ke dia punya ni connection. Saya cakap seorang. Okay. Funding requirement of the cash conversion cycle. So ada aggressive, ada conservative. Short-term fund are typically less expensive than long-term fund again. Short-term less because dia punya time period yang rendah akan mengurangkan kadar faedah. Interest. Okay. So equity is another source of long-term funding. And the cost of equity is much higher than the cost of short-term debt. Why? Because equity, not only the company issuing dia punya harga saham tu, pegangan saham, tapi benda yang sama, company akan declare ataupun bayar dividen juga kepada pemegang saham. Itu menyebabkan kos yang tinggi lah kepada company tu. Okay. Terusnya, long-term funds allow the firm to lock in its cost of fund over a period of time and avoid the risk of short-term rate increases. Okay. Tapi ada faedah dia. Long-term ni, dia akan lock dia punya interest tu. Contoh katakan 10% untuk 3 years. So 3 years tu tak akan berubah 10%. Kalau short term, lepas habis dia punya period tu, dia akan buat renew financing yang baru. So mungkin perubahan interest daripada contohlah sebelum ni 1%, next financing no longer 1%. Maybe dia akan increase kepada 1.5%. Ada perubahan kat situ. Ada peningkatan dari segi rate kat situ. Itu antara dia punya ni lah kelebihan long term financing. So long term fund minimize refinancing risk. The risk that a firm will not be able to obtain money when needed. Okay. Maknanya once dia buat lump sum dah, so dia tak perlu lagi tunggu duit untuk buat refinancing. Okay. Sebab dia dah buat secara pukal untuk 3 years. Dan dia tahu amount untuk 3 tahun permanent dia punya financing need ni, dia buat terus 3 tahun. Sebab kalau dia buat contohlah setahun, kemudian dia buat lagi, bekalan modal tu tak mencukupi untuk dia buat financing. Itu risiko dia lah. So aggressive fund strategy, okay, a funding strategy under which the firm funds its seasonal requirement with short-term debt and its permanent requirement with long-term debt or equity. Memandangkan company tu dah tahu dah, okay, setiap kali bisnes dia hanya perlukan minimum sebanyak 135,000. So dia buat secara long term. Untuk 135,000. Mana additional 1.125 million tu, lebihan tu dia akan buat secara seasonal sebab dia berubah-ubah. Bukan sepanjang tahun. Dia perlukan modal yang besar. Okay. Jadi dia buat secara short term yang tu, manakala yang permanent tu dia buat secara long term. Debt equity. An aggressive strategy normally save money compared to an approach that utilize long-term funds more heavily. Maknanya dalam strategi ni, okay, aggressive funding ni akan save more money. Okay. Sebabkan dia dah divide, dia dah segregate between long term and short term untuk cover permanent and seasonal peak of dia punya funds tu, requirement. Manakala konservatif ni dia fokus more toward long term. Okay. Kalau yang agresif ni dia berdasarkan component requirement, funds requirement tu. Kalau perlukan short term, dia buat secara short term. Kalau perlukan long term, baru dia buat long term. Tapi konservatif ni dia tak kira macam tu. Short term ke long term ke, dia buat secara long term debt or equity. Sebab dia tak nak fikir risiko dari segi tak mencukupi fund, risiko dari segi tak cukup fund untuk bayar dan sebagainya. Tak apa, dia bayar lebih interest. Yang penting duit ready untuk dia perform dia punya business operation. So conservative fund strategy ni a funding strategy under which the firm funds both its seasonal and permanent requirement with long term debt. Maknanya besarlah belanja kat sini. Okay. Sebab seasonal ni kebiasaannya adalah memerlukan fund yang banyak. Kalau buat secara long term, fund yang banyak, dia tak perlu guna pun. Contoh, setengah masa dia hanya perlukan 50,000 je. Tapi dia ada dia berhutang sebanyak 1.25 million. No point lah dia bayar interest. Macam contohlah, awak beli rumah, harga 100,000. Tapi awak loan 500,000. So, another 400,000 tu, awak kena bayar interest. Bukan awak pinjam secara percuma. Itu menyebabkan kos kepada company. Konservatif lah. Okey. Ni contoh sample fund company tadi. Okey, dia katakan permanent funding requirement dia $135,000. Okey. Manakala seasonal dia adalah mana? Okay. Seasonal funding requirement that vary between 0 to $990,000. Okay, an average 101 and $25,000. Sample can borrow short-term fund at 6.25%, long-term fund at 8%. An aggressive strategy means that sample take out long-term loans equal to its permanent funding need and short-term loan equal to seasonal need. Maknanya dia ikut pecahan ni lah. Okay, long-term secara permanent secara long-term, manakala seasonal secara short-term untuk menjimatkan dia punya bayar kadar faedah ni. So, cost of dia punya funding tu adalah sebanyak $17,128.13. Okay, sekiranya dia buat secara konservatif, keseluruhan dibuat secara long term. So total dia makin meningkat, iaitu sebanyak $45,562.5. Mana peningkatan yang banyaklah daripada 17,000 kepada 45,000 lebih. So kita tengok kat sini bahawa agresif ni akan menjimatkan cost of financing lah kepada company jika dibandingkan dengan konservatif strategi. Nak senang, guna konservatif tapi dia very costly kepada company. Okay. So this calculation demonstrate that for sample, the aggressive strategy is far less expensive than the conservative strategy. The extra expense of the conservative approach effectively eliminate the risk. Okay, memanglah dia eliminate the risk. The cost of short-term funds goes up and the sample is turned down by lender for short-term funding when it needs temporary cash. Okay, manager have to decide whether the reduction in risk is worth it. Okay, with additional cost. Adakah kedua-dua komponen tu berbaloi? Sebab cost dia besar kat sini. Amat tinggi. Okay, saya rasa dah tak ada dah yang ni. Boleh baca. And then this is the inventory management. Kita akan masuk inventory management minggu hadapan. Alright, any question? Saya rasa minggu ni sepatutnya saya cover inventory management terus. Okay. Sebab next week kita ada lagi account receivable management. Kita ada lagi beberapa subtopik lah untuk cover. Tapi kita masih lagi mood raya. Jadi saya cover untuk cash conversion cycle sahaja dahulu. Okay. Bila mood dah stabil, kita boleh ni lah. Speed up lah kita punya kelas ni. Harga pun suara pun tak apa nak ada hari ni. Siapa dengan batuk. Okay. Tak ada soalan Okay, tak ada soalan. Apa pun tahniah lah. Majoritinya dapat skor untuk midterm. Kalau dapat skor midterm bukan lagi orang kata, janganlah orang kata awal sangat bersorak. Okay. Sebab kita masih ada lagi 80 markah untuk awak kejar. Bagi kursus ni. Kerimak kuis baru 20 markah, 20% sahaja daripada keseluruhan markah. Okay, jangan senang hati dulu. Dan siapa yang rendah jangan bersusah hati. Sebab kita masih ada lagi 80 markah untuk kita kejar. Okay. Apa pun, jangan lupa isi attendance awak. Sebab tak ramai datang kelas hari ni. Saya rasa attendance pun kurang. Siapa yang ada halangan apa semua, masalah apa semua nak masuk kelas hari ni, boleh klik excuse kat situ. Jangan tak isi langsung attendance. Saya kena isi lah. Alright. Kalau tak ada apa, kita tangguh dulu dengan bacaan tasbih kifarah dan surah wal-asr. Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you, Doktor.